Today we're going to be talking about memory, and before we actually get into the PowerPoints and the very specific things about memory, I want to introduce to you a model of memory, kind of how memory works, how we think memory works overall. We're going to start with talking about three different types of memory, and then I'm going to give you three processes that we use in memory, and then I'm going to throw in another type of memory. So it's a little bit complex, but just stick with me and you'll get it. So I want to start by showing you a model of memory. We talk about three types of memory. We talk about sensory memory. We talk about short-term memory. And we talk about long-term memory. So these are the three types of memory that most people talk about. Not everybody and not every textbook talks about sensory memory, but I want to introduce you to it. In addition to the three types of memory, there are three sort of concepts that we talk about. We talk about encoding, and encoding is how we get information into our memory systems. And then we talk about storage, how we hold that information in our memory. And then we talk about recall, how we get that memory back out. So we're going to talk about those three concepts in these three types of memory. So first of all, I want to talk about sensory memory. Sensory memory, we have sensory memory for all of our sensory systems, but mostly only what we call iconic and echoic memory sensory memory has been studied. Iconic is our visual sensory memory. Echoic is our auditory sensory memory. So we have iconic and echoic. Sensory memory it has encoding, so we take information in, and it's a very small amount of information. There is no storage. So we have intake, we have encoding, we don't have storage, and we don't have retrieval. A couple of ways of thinking about this is that it's a bit of information for a very brief period of time. An example would be, let's say that you're looking up a concept in your textbook, right? And you're scanning your textbook. You are using your iconic sensory memory to do that scanning. The information is going in and then it's gone. It's going in and then it's gone. You're not retaining any of it, and you're certainly not going to recall any of it. So that is an example of iconic sensory memory. In days gone by, they used to use film. Everything's digital now, right? But they used to use film. And film has separate frames with little pictures on it. They would show the film at the rate of speed where our iconic memory would hold the first frame long enough that when we showed the second frame, it looked like it was continuous. Another example of our iconic memory. Echoic memory plays a role in our ability to, when we listen to music and the continuity of music, echoic memory plays a role there. Now what happens in our sensory memory is we're looking for that concept in our textbook, we're using our iconic sensory memory, and then we see the term that we're interested in, the term that we're looking for. And when we see it, we attend to it, and when we pay attention, it moves to our short-term memory, okay? So by selectively attending, by paying attention to something in our iconic memory, or perhaps our echoic, it's kind of easier to think about our iconic, needs a C there, doesn't it? Iconic memory, we move it to our short-term memory. How long do you think information stays in our short-term memory? What do you think? It's only a brief period of time. It's longer than our sensory memory. It's somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds. Interestingly enough, some books say different things, right? 20 to 30 seconds. That covers the range of which most people think we keep things in our short-term memory. 20 to 30 seconds. How much information can we hold in our short-term memory? We do this weird thing, don't ask me why. It's actually 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information, which means 5 to 9. I don't know why we don't just say 5 to 9. We say 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information in our short-term memory. You've probably heard of those memory courses where they say, we'll expand your memory, we'll make your memory better. Most of them focus on not increasing the number of chunks you can remember, because we have a capacity as human beings, but what they do is they increase the size of the chunks that you can remember. So short-term memory, we do have encoding. We encode by paying attention, gets into our short-term memory. It's there for about 20 or 30 seconds. So let's say you're scanning your textbook, you find the concept you're interested in, you look at it, you read the definition, and then your mom says something to you and asks you a question and gets you talking about something else. What's happened to that information? It's probably gone, right? Because you got distracted. It has left your short-term memory. You probably remembered the definition briefly, but then your mom distracted you, and now it's gone. In order to remember that information, we have to move it from our short-term memory to our long-term memory. How do we do that? We do it through a thing we call rehearsal. We rehearse the information. Once we engage in rehearsal, the information moves to long-term memory. So you read the concept, and there are 2 types of rehearsal. We'll spend some more time talking about them later, but there are 2 types of rehearsal. There's what we call rote memorization, when you just repeat the information over and over and over again. So maybe you read the definition and you memorize those words. You memorize the definition. That is rote memorization. It will get that information into long-term memory, and you'll probably be able to recall it just as it's written in your textbook. There's another type of rehearsal. It's called elaborate rehearsal, where not only do you memorize the words, you memorize the understanding. You begin to understand what the concept means. So it's not just pulling out those words out of your memory, but it's pulling out an understanding of what that term is. What we know from memory research is better recall if you do elaborate rehearsal, if you understand the concepts. So short-term memory, we rehearse it, it goes to long-term memory. How long does information stay in long-term memory? So we do have storage, right? We have storage here. We have encoding, and then we have storage. How long does information stay in long-term memory? Your textbook right now says forever. Okay, it's there. Once it's there forever. The issue is sometimes you can't get it back out. You can't retrieve it. So we have retrieval here. I want to talk about this for a minute, though. There is some new information, and I bet in about 5 years your textbooks are going to say something. They're not going to say forever anymore. I say it's unknown. We don't know how long information stays in long-term memory, but there is some data, and it's powerful data because it's what we call neurobiological data. We can look in our brains, and when we lay down new memories, we can see neural connections, right? We talked about this earlier in the semester. Those synapses are connecting with those dendrites. Those are new memories. There's now neurobiological data that sometimes those memories fade. They're actually gone. It's not that we can't pull them out, it's that they are actually gone. So we have some evidence that long-term memory doesn't last forever. Sort of intuitively, this makes sense to me, right? Because sometimes I feel like I just have so much in my brain, I can't fit any more in. And maybe neurobiologically that's true, and we lose some of those memories. We don't know yet, but well, we do know, but your textbook will change in the next year or two, I bet, maybe in 5 years. So information is there, probably not forever. Right now it's unknown. And how much information can we hold? We used to say, when it got to long-term memory, it was there forever, and you could hold an unlimited amount. But the fact that we know some of the memories go away now makes us question whether it's unlimited, right? Maybe there's just not enough space, although we have 100 billion neurons, but maybe there's not enough space, and they actually get erased. Neurobiologically, they go away. So Long-term memory, I won't ask you this on the test or anything, but right now it's unknown, probably not forever, and probably not unlimited. But your textbook is going to say these two things right now, forever and unlimited. Now, in addition to the three systems we have here, sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory, there's another type of memory that I want to introduce to you, and it is called working memory. And this is a type of memory that's a little bit hard to conceptualize or capture in words, and I'm going to give it to you in a way that is very simplistic, but it's kind of how it works, right? So we have this thing called working memory, and this is a part of learning too. So when new information comes in, gets to our short-term memory, maybe even is moving to our long-term memory, we have life experiences, right? We have all of these things that we know already and that we've done in the world. And so when new information is coming in, those old memories, or not that knowledge, that information, it's stored in our cerebral cortex, it comes forward to our frontal lobes, right? So what we already know and what we've already lived and what we've already seen comes forward, and it's now integrating with that new information that's coming into our brain, and we're sort of chewing it up, right? We're thinking about it, and then we come to a decision or a thought or whatever it might be, but that is working memory. So working memory is when we take the new stuff that's coming into our sensory system, into our brain, and what we already know sort of comes forward, because we believe this happens in our frontal lobes. And so our frontal lobes are sort of chewing it up, thinking about it, and then either we make a decision, we engage in a certain way, or perhaps we're just, having thoughts, we're just thinking about it, we learn something. That's how working memory works. Very simple way, but that's what we think happens. A couple of things to think about when you're learning and when you're studying is that rehearsal is a necessary thing. Elaborate rehearsal is more useful in terms of recall than rote memorization. Now, there are some things in life we just have to remember through rote memorization, right? Like maybe if we have to memorize the bones in the body, rote memorization is an important part of that. But you can also do elaborate rehearsal and maybe think about what each bone does. What is its purpose? Why do we need that bone? Something like that. And engage in elaborate rehearsal. It will be more organized, and you're better be able to recall that information. The other thing we know is if you tie things that you know to what you're learning now, what you're hearing this very moment, if you associate it with something you already know, you're going to have better recall. All right? And just to recap, the things I want you to be familiar with are the three types of learning: memory, sensory, short-term, and long-term. I want you to know about the encoding. We have encoding here, no storage, no retrieval. Encoding, we encode information here, hold it for a brief period of time, and there's only a certain amount of information we can hold in our short-term memory. And then if we want to get it into long-term memory, we have to rehearse it. We have encoding, we have storage, and we have retrieval. And later on, we'll talk about some of the things that interfere with our ability to retrieve information from our long-term memory. And then I want you to remember working memory and how it's the part of our thinking or our memory that integrates the new information as it's coming into our system with what we already know.